All right, guys, let's start off on number one here. So we got a couple graphs here, and it looks like they had without a 15-minute review and then with a 15-minute review. Kind of as expected here, we see that the scores are better with the review. So which statement describes the differences? Option A says there was a greater variety of scores with the 15-minute review. So that's saying that this one has a greater variety. I would say that that's not true because if you talk about variety of scores, this one does not have a 4 right there. So there's actually less variety there. The median score without the review is 8. Let's see. Well, I would say that the median score, I could calculate it, but it looks pretty obvious to me that it's either 6 or 7 right there. It's definitely not 8. You can see that the data is very centralized there, so I would cross that off as well. The scores didn't improve with the 15-minute review. I would say that's clearly false. We see that the scores were better. And so the kind of most obvious answer is the correct one there, option D. All right, next up here, they give us two equations, and they actually give us the graph as well. And so it says, which of the following are values of x are solutions to these two equations being equal? I would not actually solve this because I have the graph. I'm just going to find those points of intersection right there. If I didn't have the graph, then I would go ahead and solve that equation. But since I have the graph, I would just go ahead and use that. So I see the x value here is about negative 1.5, it looks like. And then the x value up here would be a positive 4. So I'm just going to say that's option D. All right, number 3 here, it says that square 1 has an area of 27 square inches, and then the sides of square 2 are 1/3 as long as square 1. What is the area of square 2? So I would kind of draw the squares here. So square 1 is an area of 27, and then this one we don't know the area. So I would actually find the side lengths here. So we know that x squared would equal 27. So if we square root that, I would break that down as 9 and 3, and then 3 and 3. So that would be 3 radical 3. Technically plus or minus there, but since this is a distance, I'm just going to do the positive version. And so it says these ones are 1/3 as long, so I'm going to multiply it by 1/3 to see how long these are, and so these would just be rad 3. And so the area of this one would be rad 3 squared, one of the sides squared, and so that's just going to be 3. All right, next up, number 4, it says, which of the following equations will have at least one integer solution? So integer, remember, is no decimal and no fraction, kind of a whole number, but technically whole numbers are only positive. This could be positive, negative, or 0. And then the other thing I'm already noticing here is that on radical equations, we always have to be careful about extraneous solutions. So I'm going to keep that in mind as I go along here. Okay, so I don't think there's any other way to do this other than just solve them. So if I do option A, I would just start off by squaring both sides. So that gives me 3x equals 36. And then we'll divide by 3. So x is 12. Now that is an integer solution. And if I plug it back in to check, it would be radical 3 times 12 equals 6. So radical 36 equals 6, which is certainly true. And so I'm going to say A is a correct answer to this question. Next up is B. So on this one, I would square both sides as my first step as well. Now, if we square the x minus 1, that's going to be x squared minus 2x plus 1, because we have to write it twice and FOIL it. So now I need to get one side to 0. So I'm going to get this side to 0 by subtracting x and subtracting 5 to both sides. And so that is x squared minus 3x minus 4. And then we'll go ahead and factor that as x minus 4x plus 1. And so that would mean that x equals 4. And x equals negative 1. So now I need to check those for extraneous. So rad 4 plus 5 equals 4 minus 1. So rad 9 equals 3. So that one does check out. The next one would be rad, let's see, negative 1 plus 5 equals negative 1 minus 1. So that would be rad 4 equals negative 2. So this one is actually extraneous. However, I do have one solution here, and it is an integer. So I'm going to say that's correct as well. All right, so now we got part C, so we'll square both sides as well. So 2x equals 25. And then I'll divide by 2, and so x equals 25 over 2. Now that is a legitimate solution. If you plug it back in, it would say radical, I would just say the 2's would cancel out, and that radical 25 equals 5. But it's not an integer, so once again, we're really looking for that integer solution right there, which 25 over 2 is not. So it is a solution, just not an integer. And then last up, D here, once again, just square both sides. So we get 18x equals 36. Divide both sides by 18, and x equals 2. The square root of 18 times 2 is the square root of 36, and that does equal 6. So this is a legitimate solution. It is also an integer, so I'm going to say that's correct. So only one we had there was C was not correct because it's not an integer. All right, next up, number 5 here. They're wanting which one is equivalent to x over y. So we kind of have to look at D and C here. So if we're looking at D, then I would say that this is the adjacent, and then this is the hypotenuse. And so I would say x over y would be cosine D. So that one's correct. And then if I'm looking at E here, which you can see some of these are, then this turns into the opposite side, whereas this is still the hypotenuse. So then I'm going to say that that is the sine of E. All right, next up, number 6. So they ask us for the average rate of change here between 0 and 2 seconds. On the graph, I would just plot those points. So 0 seconds and 2 seconds would be there and there. And then average rate of change, of course, just means the slope between those 2 points. So I would just count the rise over run. So it's up 4 and over 2. I see that it would be a positive slope if I connected those, and so that positive slope is 2. So that's my answer there. All right, next up here, they want us to select which one of these has a rational product. So rational, I always think of the only things we're kind of looking for is no radicals and no pi and no e. Those are kind of the big categories of irrational things. So we're looking for stuff that does not have that. Now we got to be kind of careful here because we actually do have to multiply these and or simplify them. So on option A, I would just call this 2 times negative 3, and that's negative 6. And we certainly don't have any radicals nor pi's there. So I'm going to say that that is rational. Now for option B here, I would write this as 6 pi over 4, which I would reduce to 3 pi over 2. But since I have the pi there, that is irrational. This one right here looks irrational, but if we actually multiply them together, it's a radical 16, so that's 4. And so that one is legitimate. For part D, let's see, we could actually multiply these out. I mean, there's not going to be any radicals nor pi's here when I multiply these out. If I really want to, I could do that. I would probably change this into, what is that, negative 9 over 2. And so that comes out to negative 3. So that is certainly rational. And then this one would be 2 rad 5 over 5. And so that would be irrational. All right, next up, number 8 here. So on this one, we want to solve this system of equations here. It is a triple, so we'll want to kind of add 2 of them together. I see that the x's are going to cancel very easily. So if I combine these, I get 5z equals 5. And actually, I canceled out the y's as well. So I can just solve for z here, and I get that z equals 1. So B may be an answer here, but I kind of need to keep solving because something weird may pop up here. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to go ahead and plug that z into 2 of these equations and solve those. So I get negative 2x minus 6y minus 8 times 1 equals negative 14. So obviously negative 8 times 1 is just 8, so I'm going to add the 8 over. So I get negative 2x minus 6y equals negative 6. And now so that was me plugging it in right there. So now I'll also plug it in, I don't know, I'll do it right there. So I get 2x plus 6y minus 1 equals 5. So 2x plus 6y equals 6. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add these together. I can kind of already see here what's going to happen is that all of these cancel out. I get 0 equals 0, which always means infinitely many solutions. However, this only happened when I found x and y, so I still know that z is only one, there's only one answer for z, and so you can see that this answer right here very accurately says that z only has one answer, but then the other two have infinitely many solutions. All right, next up here, the town is looking to expand a rectangular playing field that is currently 60 by 80. So then they say they want to add the same length to the length, or sorry, the same distance to the length and the width to make it kind of a bigger rectangle here. So we're going to add the x there and add the x there. They didn't say it's like a walkway all around. They're just saying we're adding to the length and the width. And then they say they want, by doing this, they want to increase it by 3,200 feet. So they actually want it to be 3,200 more than it was before. They don't want it to be 300 or 3,200 total, just 3,200 more. So what I would say then is that the area of kind of this whole thing would be 80 plus x times 60 plus x. And I would set that equal to the area that I want it to be, which is its current area, 60 times 80, but then plus the 3,200. So we could solve this, but we really don't need to here because it's really just asking for the setup, and so I can see my answer right there. All right, next up here, we got this function ab to the x, and then they give us a couple points here. So I'm just going to plug in this first point and kind of see what happens. So it says 960 equals a times b to the power of 0 if I plug that in for x. So obviously b to the power of 0 is just 1, and so that tells me that 960 really equals a. And then I would use the other point to find b. So now that I know, I would say y equals, I know this is 960, but I don't know what b is. I would go ahead and plug that point in. So 480 equals b, nope, it equals 960 to the times b to the power of 1. So if I divided both of these by 960, I see that b equals 1/2. So we will get y equals 960 times 1/2 to the power of x. Now they're asking for g of 6, so I'm just going to replace that with a 6. And I would say a calculator is okay for this one. And so this turns into 960 times 1 over 64, which simplifies to 15. All right, next up, they want to say what is equivalent to 8. So I would kind of use my properties of exponents here, which means if you have one base with two powers, you would multiply those. And so that would be 8 to the 2 over 2 power, which is 8 to the first power, which is certainly 8. So I'd say that one's right. If you also wanted to think of this as the square root of 8 squared, that's also a good way to think of it, but that is definitely 8. B right here, I would kind of think of this as rad 8 plus rad 8, which if you broke that down would be 2 rad 2 plus 2 rad 2, which is actually 4 rad 2, and that is not 8, so that's not it right there. Now this part C is actually when we multiply the same base, we do add the exponents, so that would be 2 over 2, which would be 8 to the power of 1, so that is correct. The other way you can think about that is rad 8 times rad 8, and if you multiply a radical by itself, it does give you that same number inside. All right, so part D here is actually very much like part A. I kind of already know that this all is 8 because of my answer in part A, but if I multiply that by 1/2, I'm going to get 4, which is not correct. All right, next up here, we're looking for irrational numbers when they're added to this number. Now, adding it to that number is kind of irrelevant because irrational, once again, if we have a pi, a radical, or an e, that doesn't go away, then that is going to be an irrational number. So even if I add 7 over 8 to this, even if I do a common denominator, it's still going to have that pi involved, so that is going to be irrational, and so that's a correct answer to this question. Part B here is really saying negative 2/3 plus 2 plus 7 over 8. So I could add those together, but I know that these irrational numbers, the pi's or the square roots, are not going to show up, so that's not correct on this one. For this one, if I add to 7 over 8, that rad 2 is not going away, so that will be irrational. If I add 7 over 8 to this, there's not going to be a radical showing up, so that's going to be rational. So I don't want that. And then this one, even if I change this to 2 rad 2, I'm still going to have a 2 no matter what, even if I add the 7 8. So I would say that's going to be irrational. All right, next up here, they have a box with several envelopes in cash, and then the dot plot has the amount in thousands of dollars. And which one is the good justification for this? So option A says I would choose box A because the mean is higher. I think that's clearly untrue. You can see that all of this data is kind of concentrated around 7 and 8, whereas all of this is concentrated around 9 and 10. So without actually calculating that, I can kind of tell that the mean on B is higher. I would choose box A because the center is higher. Again, the center is really not higher. I've highlighted that the center is actually lower on box A. I would choose box B because the max value is higher. That's actually inaccurate. You can see that this one right here does have the bigger max on box A. But I can choose box B here because the center is higher and it has a smaller spread, definitely. So all the numbers are kind of concentrated further to the right. All right, next up here, it says that Francis and Arthur have a summer job washing dishes. Francis can wash a load in 8 minutes. Arthur can wash a load in 6 minutes. And so this is asking how long will it take them to wash 10 loads if they wash together. So there's a couple different ways to tackle this one. How I always think of this, kind of like distance equals rate times time. I always think of this as production equals rate times time. And so we don't know either of those rates, but we know that Francis can produce 1 load of dishes at some rate, and it will take him 8 minutes. So then I would say Francis's rate is 1/8, which means that every minute he can wash an eighth of a load of dishes. Then after 8 minutes, he's going to be done. So then Arthur, on the other hand, he can produce 1 load of dishes in 6 minutes. So his rate is 1/6. Now, if you're trying to work together, which these guys are, you actually get to add your rates together. So my together equation here, we're trying to produce 10 loads of dishes. We get to add our rates together, so 1/8 plus 1/6. And then I'm actually going to figure out time, which they say to use the variable m. So I'm just going to put m there. All right, so I would actually just distribute this m in there. So I'm going to say 10 equals m/8 plus m/6. You could do common denominator and actually solve this, but they just ask you to enter an equation. So I would just enter that equation right there. All right, next up here, number 15. So Sarah claims that a sequence of transformations carries rectangle 1 to carry rectangle 2. Which of the following will do this? Okay, so we're going to go through these. A rotation 180 degrees around the origin. So that's kind of visualizing this. And then swinging this rectangle around here would be 90 degrees. And then if you just kind of think of this like a circle that it's swinging around, that next transformation would end up right there. So A is actually correct. For B, what they're saying is a translation over the y-axis, and so that would send this, if I went over the y-axis, would send it over here, and then over the x-axis would send it right down there, so that one is actually correct as well. Option C says a translation 7 units left, so that would like move it over here, and then up would get it even further away, so that looks like it's not correct. For D, translation over the x-axis would send it down here, and then move it 4 units to the right, so 1, 2, 3, 4. That would not quite make it. It's pretty close, but I'd have to go like 8 units to the right, so that's not correct. And then option... All right, next up we got option E. So this one, it says translate it over the line y equals -x. So that would be this line right here, and so that would kind of switch the orientation to be going like that. And then we would translate it over the line y equals x, which is this one, which would put it all the way across here and line it up right there. So that is it. So I'm not even going to check F because I already found 3 that apply. All right, number 16, it says we have a cylinder here. And so each cylinder has a height of 13 and a radius of 2.5. So we'll make this 13, and then we got our radius is 2.5. However, they place each bottle in a cylinder packaging, and it's an inch thick on each side of the bottle, but the height is the same. So then that means my packaging is just going to increase the radius here by 1. And so that's going to make my total radius here be 3.5. And they want the volume of the cylinder. And so volume of the cylinder is pi r squared h. So I got 3.5 here and 13. So I'll just type that in my calculator. It says to use 3.14 for pi. And if I do that, I get the volume is just, pretty much 500. There's a little decimal after that, but if we round to the nearest whole number, it's 500. All right, next up, number 17 here. It says out of a group of 58 high school seniors, 30 of them chose math as one of their 2 favorite classes. 22 of them chose science as one of them, and 13 chose both math and science. Complete the table to determine the probability of the event. Okay, so we have 58 seniors total. I think what I would do here, I would probably, let's see, make a table, or maybe I wouldn't. Okay, so I'm seeing that 13 chose math and science. So what I'm going to say is that I'm going to subtract that from this, which means that 17 picked math only. And then that if I subtract that from 22, that means 9 chose science only. And we already know that 13 chose math and science. And so how many does that leave? Let's see, that's 39. And so that would be 19 would be neither. So if we want the probability that a senior chose math or science, I would take kind of all these people in my numerator as one of their 2 favorite classes, because all of those people did. And so that would be 39 out of 58. Now they asked us to write our answer as a decimal to 2 decimal places. So I'm going to use a calculator, and then that would be 0.67. All right, and then the next one says a senior chose math and science, so that's these 13 people only. So 13 out of 58 is going to be my second one here. So I'll go ahead and type that in the calculator, and that would be 0.22. So I'm going to put that right there. All right, and then my next one, a senior chose math but not science. So that's only the math only people. So 17 only, over 58. And that's going to be 0.29. All right, next up here, they're asking for a board game. And it says that 2 number cubes are rolled with numbers 1 through 6, and their sum is added together to produce a number from 1 through 12. And then they want us to rank these rank these numbers coming up in order of probability. So whenever with 2 number cubes, you can kind of set up a table like this. And so we know that 1 number cube has 6 numbers on it. Make my table a little bigger here. And then the other one also has 6 numbers on it. Okay. All right, and then so if we added the results together, this would be 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And this one would be 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. This one would be 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Okay, so if we're looking for the chances of winning, we want the ones that kind of show up the most. So for this one, I'm just gonna count up how many times all of these numbers show up. So 9 shows up, I see kind of in this diagonal, it shows up 4 times. And then 4 shows up in this diagonal, and it's 3 times. And 7 shows up in this diagonal 6 times, so that's a total of 13. For 7, 6, and 9, we already know that 7 shows up 6 times. 6 in this diagonal shows up 5 times. And 9, we already know, shows up 4 times. And so that's a total of 15. And then lastly, 7, 8, and 2. So we already know that 7 shows up 6 times. 8 shows up 5 times. And then 2 only shows up once. And so that is a total of 12. So it looks like this one is the most likely to win because it shows up the most. This one's the second because it shows up the second. And then this one's the last because it shows up the last. All right, next up here, they're asking us which one's equivalent to this. This is really our factoring. These are perfect cubes, so I always think of SOAP, and so it's always one small parenthesis and one big parenthesis. And then so I would say it's got to be not A nor B, because those don't have that pattern. And then the same opposite, always positive. Since this is a plus, it's got to be positive, negative, positive, so it's got to be C. All right, this one is giving us a recursive function and then asking for the explicit function. So it's a little different than recursive, the a sub n minus 1, but it's really the same idea. So what this really means, this one over here, is I would always say the next term equals the previous term. That's how I interpret that, f of n minus 1 plus 3. So if I'm going to make my list here, they tell me that the first term is negative 4. And so the next term is the previous term plus 3. And then if I want one more, then it would be 5. Okay, so now I got to translate this into an explicit function. So if I plug in 1, I should get that first term. And if I plug in 2, I should get the second term, and so on. So if I plug in 1 here, 1 plus 3 is definitely not negative 4, so that's incorrect. If I plug in 1 here, 3 times 1 minus 4 is negative 1, so that's not what I want. I want the first one to be negative 4. And same thing here, 3 times 1 minus 5 is negative 2, so that's not correct, but 3 times 1 minus 7 does give me negative 4. And 3 times 2 minus 7 gives me negative 1. 3 times 3 minus 7 gives me 2. So that kind of correctly predicts all of those answers right there. All right, this one gives us a sequence here, and then wants us to pick 2 that model the sequence. So I noticed the pattern here is times 2 pattern. And so when I'm doing my recursive formula, I don't want a plus 12 pattern. That does work from 12 to 24, but not to 48. Now, B is correct because that has that times 2 pattern. It says a sub 0 is 6. So that's saying if there was another one back here, that would be a sub 0 because this one is technically a sub 1. And so if you put a 6 there, you can see that it does fit. So this one is incorrect because a sub 1 is actually 12, not 6. Next up here, I have the explicit formula, so I have to be able to plug in all these numbers and get out whatever it predicts. And so this one, I would test like 3, so a sub 3 would be 12 times 3. So that would be 36, and obviously a sub 3 is 48, so that's incorrect. If I tried a sub 3 here, it would say that it's 12 times 12 to the 3rd power. Now, that is a really big number there. It's certainly not 48, so I'm going to cross that one off. A sub 3 on this one would be 12 times 2 to the power of 2. So 12 times 4, which is absolutely 48. So that one is correct. All right, next up here, they want which of the following addition problems yields a sum which is an irrational number. So again, once again, irrational, we're looking for radicals and we're looking for pi or e. And so A doesn't have that, so I'm not even going to worry about it. B would be 2 rad 2, and so that is certainly irrational. And this one as well, if I even did the common denominator, it would be 3 plus 6 rad, no, it wouldn't. It would be 4 rad 5 over 2. But either way, we do have that radical right there, so that is irrational as well. D is rational because the square root of 4 is just 2, and then this one doesn't have a radical at all. All right, next up, number 23 here. It says they're building the new highway there. So how many miles are saved by traveling on the new highway from A to B? So we have 512 here. I know that this one then would be 13 on that right triangle. You can do Pythagorean theorem if you want. But remember that the question here was how many miles are saved. So if I took the old route, then that would be 17 miles. And the new one's only going to take 13. And how I got that 17 is I just added 12 plus 5 because that's the route you would have to take. And so I actually only save 4 miles. All right, next one here says, in each of the equations, x represents a positive integer. Select the equation that will give you a real solution. So when it says a positive integer, I would actually just use x equals 1. That is certainly a positive integer. So yeah, I'm just going to plug that in and kind of see what happens here. So 0 equals negative square root of negative 2 times 1 squared. And so that's negative square root of negative 2 squared, which is negative square root of 4, which is negative 2. And that certainly is a real solution, so I'm going to say that's our correct answer. If we would have tried any of these other ones, so if I try B and I plug in 1, then that would come out negative square root of negative 3 to the third, which is negative square root of negative 27, which is imaginary, and so you can see that that one does not come out real. C and D would have had kind of the same result. It's really because of the negatives here on the outside would have turned those negative inside the radical. All right, next up here, this one, they will have a local aquarium is designing a new fish tank in the shape of a rectangular prism. So it's kind of just like a box. All right, and the fish tank is have a height of 4 yards, a width of W, and a length that is 1 yard less than 3 times the width. So 3 times the width would be 3W, and then 1 less than that would be minus 1. Anytime you have that 1 less than, that always goes out back of your expression. And so they want the volume to be greater than 80, and so they want us to write an inequality for this. So I would say for volume of a box, it's just everything multiplied together. So I'd say 4W times 3W minus 1, and I want that to be greater than 80. It doesn't say to actually solve this, so just leave it like that. All right, next up here, it says a 50 foot long road travels directly up a 550-foot hill. So I think that what they're saying here is that this is the hill, and the road is right here traveling to the top of the hill. And so the hill is 550, and then this is 3050. And so they want to know the angle of elevation, and that's right there. I could Pythagorean for this last side, but honestly, looking at all these answers, I kind of know that it's going to be 3,000 because that's the other number that's showing up here. So I'm just going to kind of set up, or I'm going to choose which ones are set up correctly. So this is the opposite, this is the adjacent, and then this is the hypotenuse. So tan theta equals 550 over 3,000. That looks good. Sine theta would be 550 over 3050. That looks good as well. Tan theta equals 3,000 over 550. That's upside down. That would be like cotangent. Sine, I kind of already got that one. But cosine with the 3,000 is going to be good, but not that way around. It's got to be adjacent over hypotenuse. All right, next up, they gave us an equation here, and they want us to solve for the radius. So I'm just going to rewrite this. I would first multiply by 3 to get rid of the 1/3. So I get 3v equals pi r squared h, and then I would divide by pi and h. to isolate r squared. And then I would square root both sides. They use the 1/2 power here instead, but we know that means the same thing as square root. All right, next up here, you're asking me to compare two functions. F of x is already in mx plus b form here. G of x is a table. So what I would do then is I would actually translate this table into y equals mx plus b. So I would find the slope here between any 2 points. So we got 7 minus 3 over 3 minus 1. So that would be 4 over 2 or 2. And I know that if it's going up 2 every time, I can actually tell that the y-intercept would be 2 less than the f of 1, so that would be 1. So y equals 2x plus 1. You can check that does accurately predict every 1 there. So the slope on f of x is smaller. That's not true. It's actually bigger. Oh, and this is, by the way, this is g of x actually. The y-intercept on f is smaller. Then that is true because a bigger negative is a smaller number. The values are the same at 3. Well, at 3 on that one, let's see, that's 9 minus 2 is 7. And this one, 6 plus 1 is 7 as well, so they are the same. They're parallel. No, they're not. Different slope. And then this crosses the x-axis to the right. Well, since we have to select 3, that'll apply. That must be right. But crossing the x-axis is when y is 0. So if I plug in 0 for y here, it's 2x plus 1. That would be a minus 1 divided by 2 is negative 1/2. And for the other one, it would be 2 over 3 equals x. So f of x is to the right there. All right, next up, number 29. So for this one, they want to approximate the number of students at their school that ride the bus. So select 2 options that will help them create an appropriate estimation. So option 1, survey all students and find out who rides the bus. So I think that's the best way, is just ask everybody. Option B says count the number of students on one bus and multiply that by the number of buses. That would be okay. I'm going to put that as a maybe because that would kind of give us an estimation here. Survey the students who are dropped off by parents in the morning. I would say that's not a good idea because there's other options as well. There's like walking to school. So that's not going to help us find out how many people are on the bus. This one says count the number of students on every 3rd bus and then use the average to estimate the number of students who ride the bus in the morning. I'm going to put that as a maybe as well. That actually sounds better than B because it would be more data for us. Option E, call 1 student and ask if they take the bus. I don't think that's very good data. It's just 1. And then option F is kind of like option C. It's ask them if they bring, there's like other options there. So I'm really between B or D here. D would just give us more data than B, so I'm going to pick that one instead. B would probably be the 3rd best answer, but we only want 2. All right, next up here, they gave us this equation, and it's got the 0.8t right there. And so they want us to select all statements that are true about the van. It decreases in price 20%. That is true. Because it's 0.8 there, that's kind of 1 minus 0.2, so that is the decrease of 20%. It does not decrease by 80%, it decreases by 20%. It doesn't decrease by a dollar amount. That's actually going to be different every year. It will be $2,000 the first year, but that will change. And then this one says 80% of the value. That's actually correct because they don't say 80% less, they say 80% of, and that kind of matches up here with E, 0.8 times. 31 here is just asking you to FOIL and combine like terms, so I'll let you guys see that one on your own. 32 here asks us to graph the parabola. I first of all see that it's negative, so it can't be option A. We know our vertex here is going to be 3, negative 1. So then I would cross off B and D, so then it's got to be C. All right, next up here it says that on a sunny day, a lamp post casts a shadow that's 18 feet long on the ground and it's 13 feet tall. So the 13 feet tall casts a shadow that's 18. And then what's the angle of elevation of the sun? Okay, so we're going to do a tan of theta equals 13 over 18. And we'll just do the tan inverse on both sides. And so that would be theta equals tan inverse of 13 over 18. I'll let you guys do that on the calculator. All right, next up 37. So this one, they want to see where f of x equals g of x and select all that applies. So I'd say that's here and here. So this one looks like about negative 0.9. And then next one's about 4.2. All right, next up here, we're going to solve this equation. So I would factor this 3x minus 7 and 3x plus 7. You can solve it with square roots as well. Just make sure you don't forget the plus or minus. So x would equal 7 over 3 and negative 7 over 3. So we're just going to type those in right there. All right, next up here, we got a quadratic, and Jeremy finds these zeros. I would probably find the zeros myself by factoring. So negative 30 and 1 would be 6 and negative 5. And then using the box here, we get 2x squared, negative 15, 6x and negative 5x. So we get 2x minus 5 and x plus 3. And x plus 3. So x would equal 5 over 2 and negative 3. And so it looks like Jeremy is wrong. And the answer would be right there. All right, next one here says, which one of the following leads to an extraneous solution? So on these ones, extraneous solutions make the denominator 0. So on all of these, we can actually multiply the denominator over. And so then we're just kind of solving the numerator. And it looks like all of those numerators are the same. And so any way I look at it, I'm solving this equals 0, just multiplying the denominator over. So I would go ahead and factor this to y plus 10, y minus 3. So y equals negative 10 and y equals positive 3. Now, which one of these would lead to an extraneous solution? Whichever one would make a denominator 0. So it looks like the only one that does that is C, because we have y plus 10, that negative 10 is going to be extraneous. This one actually asked for the extraneous solution, so I'm going to square both sides to start. So 11 minus x equals x squared plus 2x plus 1. Got to get one side to 0 here. So get 0 equals x squared plus 3x minus 10. Go ahead and factor that. X plus, what would that be? Oh yeah, plus 5 minus 2. So x equals negative 5, x equals positive 2. And so it's asking which one's extraneous. So I'm going to plug them back in. So radical 11 minus negative 5 equals negative 5 plus 1. I'm going to the original equation here. So radical 16 equals negative 4 plus 1. Actually, that's going to be a negative 5 plus 1. So then rad 16 equals negative 4. That's clearly not true. So this one is extraneous. So that may be one of my answers, or it will be one of my answers, but I got to check 2 as well. So the square root of 11 minus 2 equals 2 plus 1. So the square root of 9 equals 3. So that one actually is correct, but it does ask for the extraneous, so that's going to be A.